are a couple of things that the president said to us in the Oval Office yesterday. I was there as part of the pool of what he wants to bring up. Syria, Russia's support of Assad, but also Ukraine. He mentioned that, presumably Crimea. He did not answer whether or not he will bring up election interference. And particularly given his tweet this morning, there are some real concerns among some of the president's critics that he doesn't seem to be buying his own intel officials' assessments on this. Why do you think the president seems to still doubt this?
Well, that's a good question. There is unanimity within the intelligence community, indeed within the national security establishment of the U.S. government, as well as with our allies, that the Russians did interfere in the 2016 election. I think Mr. Trump is turning a blind eye to it because it doesn't help what he wants to do. It poses an obstacle, an impediment to continuing this relationship with his good friend, Mr. Putin. I'm also very concerned about what hasn't been done to protect our next elections this year as well as 2020. There needs to be more things done, not just in terms of letting Russia know that this is intolerable, but also to better protect that environment so that Russia and other actors are not going to have the opportunity to try to manipulate the electoral process.
But when you get at the why of the question, and you address it a little, you say he worries that it's an obstacle, you believe, to try to get things done. Is it a legitimacy thing? Is it what is it about this?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. As you point out, I think he is concerned that if he gives credence to that, it will raise questions, more questions in people's mind about whether or not Donald Trump was legitimately elected President of the United States. He clearly is very fearful of the Mueller investigation and other things that are trying to get to the bottom of the relationship between Russia and those who might have been supporting Mr. Trump during the campaign. But I do think he is, when he talks about the size of his crowds and the electoral victory, he always embellishes and basically just misleads the American people about the situation and the facts.
I want to talk more about your view on President Trump, but before I do, I want to get to the point that Bill was talking about, this idea that allies are really concerned. Secretary of State John Kerry spoke with our own Andrea Mitchell about this at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Here's what he had to say, and then I'm curious as to how you would react to this.
What makes this different is the G7 meeting that just took place, the rancor within our allies and the suspicions, the deep resentment they have for the secondary sanctions that they've decided to impose because we've pulled out of Iran deal, but all the other countries are still in the deal. And that extraterritoriality and challenge to sovereignty is really angering Macron, Merkel, May, and the leaders of the region.
So as Secretary Kerry, former Secretary Kerry, talks about the concerns that allies have, here is President Trump, and you mentioned North Korea, again, having met with allies and meeting with an adversary. Here is President Trump again, meeting with allies at one summit, then moving on and immediately talking with somebody who's long been considered, in many ways, an adversary.
Well, he is giving in to Mr. Putin. I think that is the concern that the allies have. And the allies, especially the European allies and NATO, feel that Russia presents a threat, both in terms of their continued interference in their elections, which they do, but also the influence that Russia is exerting over the European continent. That the United States used to be the defender of our European allies and to push back against the Russians. The fact now that Mr. Trump is aligning himself with Mr. Putin is a concern.
Is Putin playing the president?
Unfortunately, I think Mr. Trump is either not smart enough to realize that Mr. Trump is playing him, or he doesn't care. And it is quite unfortunate because, again, the NATO summit is coming up. It's almost 70 years of this alliance and partnership that is built on liberty, democracy, and rule of law. And it seems as though Mr. Trump does not really take those very important values that undergird the NATO alliance seriously. So catering to the authoritarian leaders of the world, which is what he's doing in terms of Mr. Putin, Kim Jong-un, and others, it's very dispiriting, I think, to those who really believe strongly that the United States has to demonstrate this leadership.
Were the president to be watching this moment of cable news right now, he wouldn't like what he's hearing from you. He has problems with things that you've said in the past, as you are fully aware. You are the subject of a new New York Times Magazine piece called "The Spy Master Steps Out of the Shadows," talking about how you've increasingly become more vocal of taking on this president, noting that you don't call him President Trump, you call him Mr. Trump, right? Mm-hmm. Why?
I've worked for 6 presidents, worked very closely and directly for 3, President Clinton, President Bush, 43, and President Obama. All of them, I think, deserve the respect and admiration of the American people. I didn't agree with their policies, but I think what Mr. Trump is doing is really unconscionable in terms of continuing to advocate for his own personal interests and doing things that I think are contrary to many years of the United States' global role, as well as his continued misleading and telling lies to the American public. He has no credibility right now. And I take issue with having a person in the Oval Office who doesn't represent those traits, those qualities that we should expect of a president.
You've called him a danger to national security. In your view, is this president a danger to democracy?
Well, I think he is in terms of some of the things that he has done and said.
These are strong words.
Well, they are strong words, but I think you look at Mr. Trump and what he does in these various rallies, he is increasing divisiveness in this country. He is one of the principal reasons why we have such a polarized electorate out there and populists.
Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.